sessions, and this is going to be a great way to start our afternoon. We have an excellent panel on an excellent topic, DEI, fostering courageous conversations for lasting change in the workplace. And I was telling Lynn that as Sherman Atlanta president, I tend to use my position to cherry pick, the sessions I wanted to see, and I have the utmost respect for the Turknets and everything that they've done. And then she also reminded me that, Dr. Cherry is on the panel. And it's like, okay, well, there must have been serendipity. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann, and they'll do the introductions. And I hope you all have a great session. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Ann Quiello. I'm a senior consultant at the Turknet Leadership Group, and I'm also an executive coach. I'll be happy to introduce our three remarkable panelists in just a moment, but I wanted to just frame our discussion from the outset because we are here to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion, but from a perspective of how we're going to create an environment where leaders and employees choose to embrace their differences and connect with one another in a more meaningful way. I ran across the name Mary Parker Follett in preparing for today. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of her. I had not, but interesting. 1920s management guru. In fact, she was considered to be the management guru's guru because Peter Drucker said that she had the greatest impact on current thinking back in the 1920s. Well, she advised companies back in the 1920s that diversity is a fact and inclusion is a choice.
Absolutely.
Back in the 1920s. She went on to say that inclusion gets the right people to the table, but that's where the hard work should begin. So we need to spark the energy and connection between people to make something that is bigger happen, something bigger than a single individual. So that's why we're here today, is to learn how to do that. We know that diversity is indeed a fact, and it is growing. I found the latest 2020 U.S. Census and the findings from that to be very interesting. Listen to this. Since 2010, the Black population has increased 5.6%. The Hispanic population in this country has increased 23%. The Asian population has increased 35.5%, the fastest growing demographic in the country. And those that see themselves as being a combination of Black with other demographic groups actually claim to have grown 88.7% in this country. Now, all of this growth in the midst of the white population has decreased by 8.6%, actually decreased. So we've got that context going on where diversity is indeed a fact. And we're in a context that is not only more complex in diversity, but also, of course, filled with anxiety. So we've got racial unrest in the aftermath of high-profile killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and the advent of the Black Lives Matter movement. We have continued gender inequity. Despite a record high number of Fortune 500 women CEOs, in 2020 that is, there are still nearly 13 companies run by a man for every one company run by a woman. And only 29% of our senior leadership positions in this country are held by women. Now, this pipeline of women into senior leadership positions is at high risk because we've lost nearly 3 million women from the workplace in a coronavirus-induced exodus. It's probably reflecting persistent pay inequality, undervalued work, antiquated notions of caregiving, and it could go on and on. So in all of this context, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice, equity is a choice. How do we spark the energy and connection between people in such a meaningful way, in a real way, around diversity, equity, and inclusion? All right, well, we acknowledge we don't have all the answers, but we do have three remarkable women here today, and they're in the trenches. and they have some very useful ideas to share with you. So I'm going to bring these amazing women into this conversation. Please know we'll have time for questions towards the end of our time together. So capture your questions as best you can and hold on to them, and we'll get to those. So today we have with us Kathy Harden, and there we go. Kathy Harden, who's coming to us from Emory Healthcare, Elba Pareja Gallagher, who comes to us from UPS and also from showme50.org, and Dr. Cherry Collier, organizational psychologist, strategist, executive coach, senior consultant with TurkNet, and certainly an expert in this whole area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right, ladies, we know that your bios are in the speaker information, so I won't go into your work history now, but if you could, just each one of you share your current role, 2 to 3 of your key responsibilities or your focus of your work, and your experience with diversity, equity, inclusion. Shall we begin with Elba down there?
Microphone. Okay, good. Great. Thank you so much, TurkNet and the conference. Sherm, I really appreciate it. So what do I do? You can read my bio, but I like to think that in both my jobs, I have 2 full-time jobs. I have my day job with UPS, which I love. I've been there 25 years, 24 in finance. But now I spend my days connecting people and ideas to deliver value across the entire UPS stakeholder community. And so that keeps me busy in the day. And then my night and weekend job is Show Me 50. We're working for 50% women in leadership. And again, I'm trying to connect people to improve the talent management systems that tend to create systemic bias.
And next, Kathy?
Good afternoon. Thank you all for inviting me and giving the opportunity to participate in this significant panel discussion. I am currently with Emory Healthcare, and I serve as the VP of Employee Relations for the system. And I also serve as the Senior Business Partner for the corporate arm of Emory Healthcare. And in that role, I actually support HR operations and all of the culture work that we do around engagement, retention, and diversity.
And Dr. Cherry.
Greetings and happy day. It's a delight to be in the room with all of you. So it's been a long time since I've had the actual opportunity to see you. So if I look up and smile, know that it's because you're in the room and not on the Zoom. What do? I partner with the TurkNet group, and I've been very fortunate to have Lynn and Bob TurkNet in my life for a very long time. And they have really patterned and partnered and really thought very thoughtfully about what diversity means. And so what does that mean to me, and what does that help me do what I do? I work with companies to help people be seen, heard, and understood. And so many times when people talk about diversity, the leaders are coming in, what's the ROI? And I'm like, well, the ROI is making sure that the people in your organization feel seen, heard, and understood. That doesn't always mean the money. It means, did you say hello? Did you acknowledge that they're in the room? Are you really connecting to them? So what we really do is we really help people move beyond this language and all of the books. And I will say that my dissertation back in the 90s at the University of Georgia was actually on stereotypes. And it was published, and I found at the 0.001 level of significance that race mattered more than ability. And as a scientist, we are so excited to get significant results, but I cried like a baby. I boo-hooed and boo-hooed, and as my major professor was so excited because he knew publication was coming. I had to put in the literature that if a minority is applying for a job, they're less likely to get that position solely if they saw the face or the name. And that's very powerful. So I've worked for the last years to really make sure that people understand what matters. And what matters is helping people get not only a seat at the table, but doing what the TurkNets are doing and have done for me, making sure they can also talk and dance.
Mm-hmm. And I should say that we have a handout at the table, if you might have seen it. And at the very top of the additional resources is the publication of that dissertation, I believe, right?
Yes.
Stop, Look, and Listen, Exploring the Human Condition. So that would be what you were referencing early, I think.
Yes.
All right, so Elba, showme50.org, the organization that you founded, has a remarkable website with even including a 7-part resource kit for anyone that's interested in gender equality and helping their organizations improve gender equality. And so on that website, there's a great quote. It says, it's from Sheryl Sandberg, and it says, "Talking can transform minds, which can transform behaviors, which can transform institutions." So can you elaborate on how one person through talking can actually influence something like gender equality?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good question, because many times people don't know where to begin or what to do. It's a bit overwhelming. I work now in environmental responsibility, social responsibility, and if you can imagine, reducing the amount of carbon emissions that the global economy produces is kind of a big deal. And people think, well, what can I do? You know, I'm going to recycle this, or, you know, is my little electric vehicle going to do anything? The same thing happens when you're trying to change and transform talent management systems in the workplace. And I truly believe that the reason that gender inequality persists is because the playing field is not level. And I'm talking to the people who could really make an impact, right? HR professionals. What can one person do? Well, I'll tell you, if you teach people not only, you know, give them the passion and the motivation to act, but you have to give them the ability to act. They have to have the skills, and that's what Show Me 50 does. So I'm a perfect example of one person, and I'm going to give you a specific tactic. We've been trying on the Hispanic Employee Resource Group at UPS, we call it crecer, which means to grow in Spanish. We observed that Latinas, Hispanic women, are a tiny fraction of leadership positions at UPS. And so about a year ago, after several years of trying, we formed a committee, and we called it the Latina Committee. And we began to try to influence education and get a seat at the table to the voice of the chief HR officer. And we finally were able to get a seat, and they are listening to us, and we are going to work with them to create a program of sponsorship for Hispanic women who, according to the EEO-1 that we published for the first time this year, we only have 1% Hispanic women in leadership positions. And so there's a big gap to fill, and in a collaborative way, we spoke up, presented data, you know, let data speak for itself, right, as we just discussed, and then we're gonna be on the same page, and we're gonna work together. So I think the key is collaborating both with each other, the people who want the change, and with the organization in a positive, constructive way to show what's in it for each party. So I do think it takes a catalyst person, but once that catalyst person begins to influence the peers, you can to get some momentum and really try to influence. So it's about influencing skills, the very skills that you learn from mentorship programs and, you know, a lot of the work that the TurkNet Leadership Group does, right? So yeah, one person can make a difference. And I'm here to tell you, I am an example of that. I'm so proud that just this week we got an appointment, a second appointment with our chief HR officer to really drive some change.
Wow, that's
Awesome.
great. And I told Alba earlier, I wish I had had access to this toolkit 20 years ago to be able to get the kind of influence skills that you really need to be a single or a starter advocate, I should say, a spark inside the organization to influence. So it's a very well done website. It's showme50.org. So if ever you have an opportunity, I strongly urge you to take a look at it. All right, so Dr. Cherry, you know, many organizations that want to improve their diversity, equity, and inclusion maybe implement training programs, or they bring in an expert like you. So what do you do inside of the programs that you bring that really creates lasting change? And on top of that, how do you help organizations foster dialogue that will lead to greater connection and understanding?
Yes, excellent question, and thank you for the question. And when we started to think about lasting change, we all know this thing that we have up here, the brain, and we do a lot of neuroscience work. So the head is really powerful, and that's what we know. And so we're always walking around talking about, here's what I know. And our hands, many times, we're ready to do something. But what we forget is the heart connection. So what we're doing with our interventions is really making sure there's a head, heart, and hands implementation. And I'm a reformed headist, a know-it-all. And so I didn't recognize the power of connection. And so you can't be at the top of the organization merely using your left brain, because left brain comes with very specific behavioral characteristics. So we do a lot of, as IO psychologists, we do a lot of profiling. So your left brain is awesome, right? Logical, and logic matters. But when you're starting to think about connection and change, that right brain feeling is really important. So what we really do is we really help organizations really get beyond the lip service and really move into the implementation where the people are. Now, I'm going to say this, and this might not be popular, but sometimes we don't win when we're going out for proposals because we're not walking in with a cookie cutter solution, okay? So some of the big boys and girls who've been doing this for a long time, and in my personal opinion, have created the problem that we have today. Because if you look at their boards, they all look the same. And so you're saying, oh, I'm implementing a diversity and inclusion solution. And recently, I literally had someone to call me, and they said, here's the company that we're using. Would you Google the board for us? And could you come in and speak to our organization why, yes, they have an amazing bias training, and yes, they have an amazing class, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but look at their board. Is their board diverse? And if you Google it for yourself, and I'm not going to call their names, you will see that they don't have a single person of color anywhere they have 50 leaders up there. Nobody looks like the people that they are bringing in to do this diversity and inclusion work. That is a problem. That is a problem. Is their training exceptional? Yes, it is. But the people who are feeling the pain are at the bottom of the organization. The people who are making the decision are at the top of the organization. And so at some point, I taught at a business school. I went to, have hours in my MBA as well. I know they say top down, but diversity and inclusion implementations have to be bottom up and top down. And the people at the top have to understand you don't feel the same pain that the people in the bottom are feeling. And so back to the head, the heart, and the hands. You have to use your hands to touch people in the way to say, I have no idea what you're feeling. And all people who are people of color are not monolithic. So they aren't all feeling the same thing either. So it's really important that you take the pulse and you have conversations. You let people say what they feel, and for once, we all just listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for an incredibly important reason. And that's so we can listen twice as often. And that's what our programs are really designed to do. So it's easy to hire cookie cutter folks. We're going to come in, here's our solution, boom, boom, boom. Here's our results, boom, boom, boom. But did your people change? No, because you hired the same people to fix the same problem that they created.
Whoa. Tell it like it is, Dr. Cherry. Well, so bottoms-up approach. And what I like about the program that, that you have implemented through TurkNet is that there's an A at the end for action, right?
Yes.
Is that what you mean by the hands?
Yes, we always, our strategies, we follow all of the principles. There's going to be action, there's going to be milestones, there's going to be deliverables, but it's going to be really reaching out to make sure the people who are most impacted by those pain points have a say-so, not just the CEO and the C-suite. I love the C-suite, but the people where the pain is, we've got to get there and ask them. And so we use the action. Yes.
So that sounds like the epitome of holding the courageous conversations that we're
Courageous.
talking about today then for the lasting change.
Yes.
So without those conversations from the bottom up, there cannot be lasting change. Is that what you're suggesting?
Correct. And
Yeah.
someone's got to be willing in private to tell the CEO, when we go out here, just smile, okay? It's okay to just smile and pretend like you don't always have to have the answers on
Right.
that day.
Yeah.
And so the people at the bottom, what person at the bottom is going to want to tell the CEO, you're pretending like you know how I feel, but you don't.
Yes.
And so that's why you have whisperers or mediators, people like us that are willing to go in there for you. And we make sure that the people at the top look fabulous, and we make sure that the people in the bottom get heard. And that's how we're creating lasting change. It isn't lip service. We're looking at actual behaviors that drive change.
Yes.
And we've tested
Okay.
this, and we know.
All right, great. Thank you. So Kathy, you've been a senior HR leader and a strategic HR partner, I think, for over 20 years in large companies. What have you seen or done that you can share as a best practice to influence leaders to model the behaviors or shift the culture towards greater DEI?
Well, I think a lot of what we've heard already really drives to the heart, to the core of what organizations need to be doing. In the wake of the Black Lives Matters movement, working at Emory, having recently been acquired, DeKalb Medical having recently been acquired by Emory Healthcare, you're a kind of a smaller organization going into this huge 26,000 plus employee organization. But at the core of the work that I was doing at that time was really still dedicated to the people at that DeKalb operating unit, or formerly DeKalb Medical. And so one of the senior nursing leaders and myself started talking about what were some of the things that we could do to really address DEI within the DeKalb operating unit and really kind of plant and become an example for the greater Emory Healthcare. And we felt like we had a unique advantage because we were heavily minority. And so we really stepped back and thought about, who is it that we are trying to impact? And so we readily came up with, it's the community, it's the people that we serve, it's our staff, and it's our leaders. And so the approach was to stand up a diversity, equity, and inclusion council that could address all of those components. And so what we figured that needed to look like was, one, we had to make sure we understood who we served. We had to understand where the gaps were in the service that we provided to the community. And so we stood up this council that was a three-pronged approach. Our patients, so we had a specific council that addressed health and wellness equities in the care that we provided to our patients. Our people, a team to address inequities and opportunities within our organization. And then our community. We wanted to support Decatur, Lithonia, and South DeKalb County in a way that it had never been supported before by a healthcare organization. And so we really built interdisciplinary teams to include on that patient team. We had physicians, we had clinicians to include nurses, therapists, respiratory therapists, frontline staff. And the majority of all of these teams is frontline staff, because Dr. Cherry and Elba both have mentioned how important it is to get to the bottom of the organization. And if you don't understand what those frontline employees need, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, you're going to miss the mark. And so about 90% of each work group is comprised of frontline staff, interdisciplinary staff. So we have people from environmental services who are cleaning our hospitals, changing beds, turning rooms, people who cook our meals, people who are in IT, the nurses, frontline supervisors. We have representation from every corner and every discipline within the organization representing each team that we built. Then we went to the board and we asked for board participation on the community team. So we have board participation. We went into the community and we have politicians and people, leaders in the community who are serving on the community council, because we want to hear from them. What are they hearing from their constituents about their healthcare needs and where their challenges are? We thought about the disparities in women's care and the morbidity issues that we face with African American women in maternal deaths. And so our Women's Center executive director is a champion and leader on that patient care team. And so we thought about every corner of the organization and every corner of the community that we serve. And understanding where the need is became our first priority. And so that's how we started that work.
I'm just in awe. I don't know about you all, but it's amazing to me, and I can hear the pride in your voice.
Oh, absolutely.
I can imagine the pride in the employees and the frontline
Yes.
workers and everybody that was involved, the politicians, the community, everybody, even the board, to be involved with something that's so much greater than any
Absolutely.
individual. So.
Yeah, and it's ongoing work that, we just scratched the surface in year one to really learn what we needed to do, but the real work starts now in figuring out in COVID, how do we speak to the community to address the concerns around vaccination and the hesitancy. Hesitancy is real. It's real for different reasons, but it's still real. And so how do we address the hesitancy in our communities to make sure that we're not overflowing with COVID patients and that we're not losing patients every day to this virus? And so we have champions across the organization who are out in the communities, who are talking to our staff, who are talking to the patients who feel underrepresented or underserved. And so that work is real, and it has to happen every day in order to drive the change.
Wow.
Anne, I'm startled. If you listen to our stories,
They're all similar.
It's so impactful to see the action that it really is, you need the hierarchical part of organizations to drive change, but you then also need that front line.
Absolutely.
And what I call adaptive leadership, where everyone's working together and collaborating, and yeah, you just need all of it, right? And the hands, I love what Dr. Terry talked about, the head, the heart, and the hands.
Yeah, that's what's striking to me too, is it's a very comprehensive approach. It's not a program du jour that you bring into an organization for 6 months, implement it, and then you're gone. It's very comprehensive from every approach that you all described. Well, this is to all of you. Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, who is the author of Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria? She's a renowned race psychologist and also the president emerita of Spelman College. And I'm also proud to say that she was my guest on our TurkNet's podcast that was just recently dropped, so hopefully you all will listen into that. But back to Dr. Tatum, she points out that we are in a racially conscious society, of course, and that conversations about race are really difficult because we are so sensitive, and even those conversations are considered taboo by many people. So what is the role, ladies, of organizations to actually enable these conversations? In other words, after the racial killings in the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, what is the role of organizations to hold those kinds of conversations, and what is the value of doing that?
I'll go first. I don't want to come behind Dr. Cherry, so I'll go first. First of all, I think conversations have to start with me. Every leader in the organization has to self-reflect and figure out, are they doing what they can with the influence, power, and the vast audience that they have and connections that they have across whatever their industry is. Are you doing enough to drive change, to make an impact? So it has to start with me. But organizations have to take that conversation from the top to the body. And so the head has to speak it into existence for it to grow, to shape, to live, and to thrive. It has to thrive after it lives. Because you can speak something, you can build teams, you can build programs, but if you don't push life into it with those hands and that heart, it's not going to thrive. It'll die and dissipate. And so we've got to become comfortable with being vulnerable. We have to show that vulnerability to the organization. To me, there's never a better sight than to see an executive, a CEO, show their vulnerability to the organization in a manner that's going to be thought-provoking, that's going to drive action, and then have a call to action behind that vulnerable state. Because that's when people are the most receptive to engage, is when you've demonstrated that vulnerability and then you extend an opportunity to serve. And so the conversation has to start at the top, has to start with me personally to be engaged, to make sure that I'm doing everything that I can do as an executive. And then we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We have to have uncomfortable conversations around race, around disparities, around inequities. Whatever your inequity is in your organization, whether it's women in leadership, whether it's minorities in leadership, whether it's pay inequities, promotion inequity, opportunity inequity, we have to be willing to drive what's real in our own organizations. And that leader has to be willing to own that. And it doesn't mean that you can solve every problem in the now, but pick something that's important to your people, that's going to drive retention, that's going to drive engagement and commitment, and to demonstrate to your teams that you're willing to put the work in and that you're willing to make the change. So it has to start at the top, has to start with me, and it has to be meaningful to the people that you're leading.
Thank you. Who else?
Okay, I'll go next. I'll just say that to me, in its simplest form, is you just have to start talking, period. And you don't have to make it some big project. Something as simple as an executive grabs someone that's different from them and just ask them any kind of question to get to know them better. For example, what could this company do to make your experience here better? That's it, and just listen. Maybe they start talking about pay. You should pay me more. Okay, tell me more about that. And then you begin to learn their family circumstances or whatever the situation may be. And the more often that we have those actual, back to the hands, conversations, you get to know people, it'll trigger new opportunities for ideas of meetings or, collaborations. But I think you just have to do it.
Absolutely.
It's so frustrating. It's like people want these answers. It's like, oh, what should I do? Just talk. Just start talking, having conversations. You mentioned, Dr. Sherry, conversations.
Yeah.
So I love that, and of course, being a graduate of Spelman College, and having worked with Dr. Tatum, I love that book. And the question alone is very powerful because it says that there's something wrong with certain groups of people sitting at the lunch counters. Like, why are you together? Well, there's this thing called a like-me bias. So we like people that are like ourselves. It is not an accident. And so people who are in the same sororities tend to like each other. People who have the same football team, and yes, I love the Falcons, Lord have mercy. But I saw a Patriot thing right here. They beat us 28-3. I was right there in the Super Bowl, so that's very painful. So, so what tends to happen is we want to stay around people who are going to hold us down with how we're feeling about the Falcons. So it's important that we start to understand that how we have these conversations really matters. And what you said was the word that I really wrote down was vulnerability. We've got to be vulnerable. And that's something that we're not prepared to be. And as leaders, we are taught that you must have an answer. Sometimes you don't. And so I don't want to say shut up and listen, but what I will say is just stop, look, and maybe listen. Because what's happening is you're pretending like you have an answer and you don't, and that answer isn't true. And I don't know if you've ever seen that Waterboy clip where his mama told him some stuff about the medulla oblongata that wasn't true. So, he's believing that emotions come from one thing when they really don't. And so what we want to start to do when people are having conversations, be willing to sit and listen and let that sink in before you go out and try to fix it. And there's another excellent video that I love, and it's called It's Not About the Nail. And so I don't know if you've ever seen that video, but please Google it. It's Not About the Nail. And there's a woman who has a big nail, and she's talking to a male, and the male is constantly trying to fix it. She doesn't want him to fix it. She wants him to listen to her. And so we have to be willing to listen to people say things that may be absolutely uncomfortable. And step one is that process. And so what we did with an organization is what we call resilient sessions. And we really let people just talk. We framed it in the beginning, making sure that people knew, I know you're going to be ready to do something because we're no longer human beings, we are human doings. So we got to do so much. But today, we're going to just listen to people talk. And after people are done talking, then you can move to action. But first, you've got to let people get it out. It's kind of what we call in coaching, as a master certified coach, we call it clearing. If a person comes to a coaching session and they were just in an automobile accident, they're not ready to talk about work. I let them clear. And so there are some things that people have inside of them you might not want to hear, but they're still carrying it. And so that stuff that they're carrying, if you give them the chance to get it out, you'll know it too, and that will give you that way forward. And so that's what I think. I think having the conversation freely and letting it happen, recognizing it's not about the nail, it's about knowing that you see me, you hear me, and you may not even understand yet, but you're vulnerable enough to be willing to think about it in that point. That is where we move to getting people to sit at different places in the cafeteria.
Yes.
See, I never just sat with people who were just like me. I am a scientist, so I'm much more intrigued by everybody else. Yes.
Yeah, it's that curious mind,
Curiosity.
right? That, either got you in trouble or got you out of trouble, one way or the other. But
Both.
and that's what struck me about everything you all said was staying in your curious mind and just being curious about the other person and trying to understand. All right, last question, then we want to get to your questions. The pandemic, work from home, people are zoomed out, masks, vaccine mandates, for and against. So what kind of impact do you think all of this is going to have on all of our efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what can organizations do with re-onboarding people and employees back to the workplace to create this productive, engaging employee experience? That's a lot, but if you could comment quickly on what you think.
Okay, I'll go. I'm going to bring it back to gender equality and the women in the workforce. Just yesterday, the Wall Street Journal came out with their annual Women in the Workplace study with Lean In, so it was a big fold out in the Wall Street Journal. And so I think that what companies are going to have to do is really focus on flexibility and enabling employees, men and women, to create spaces where they can fit work into their lives, not the other way around. And so I'm just going to throw out a couple of facts here. And this is as a result of the pandemic, employees, especially women, want remote working to continue. Out of all men in this study, 57% want to continue to work at least 3 days a week at home. For women, it's 67% want to continue to work at home. Black women, 70%. And so I think that that we really need to focus on being flexible with our employees and not letting conventional ways of working and managing our workforce win. Just in the newspaper last weekend, I saw a panel of CEOs in Atlanta, and a gentleman, the CEO of Inspire Brands, said that we have got to let go of the norms that have been so comfortable for us, back to what we talked about, getting uncomfortable, right, with the uncomfortable. Let go of those norms and recognize that we've got to change the way we manage our workforce, and that's going to continue. And if we don't, then we risk losing. This is full of statistics that women are leaving the corporate environment, and we're going to go back to having boards that look like the one you were describing, right? And we need diversity for innovation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You said something I thought about something when you were reading the statistics about the people who want to remain remote. Income really drives people's need for remote work. If you think about the white male being the most dominant in income in our country, they have the most flexibility to provide alternate care for their families, et cetera, to be able to go back into the brick and mortar building to do the work. Women and minorities are lower on that income scale, and so there's less flexibility. The lower the income, the less flexibility employees have with childcare arrangements, technology in the home. And so a lot of people find themselves in a position to have to make a choice to leave their jobs because, one, they're being asked to come back in when their children are at home doing remote learning. There's no one there in the home to care for them. They don't have bandwidth from an income perspective to provide some alternate care arrangement, or they may not have the technology, or if they have the technology, there's one computer in the house and their child is in school on it. And so I don't have a second computer in order to be able to Zoom every meeting that I'm supposed to be in, et cetera. And so they make difficult choices to walk away from their jobs, from their careers. And so we really have to think about, I had some prepared notes, but as we've been talking, those notes don't seem quite right. But just from the things that I've seen in our organization, we really have to be deliberate to trust people. A lot of what I've seen in years past around remote work, even having remote work conversations, come from a lack of trust from leaders to staff and leader to leader, because I feel like you're not going to be as productive if you're at home at your kitchen table doing the work versus being where I can see you in an office next door to me. When actually reality has shown us now that people are more productive at home because there are less interruptions. There's no one posted up in the doorway having a casual conversation. People have flexibility to get the project completed after hours versus during core business hours. And so people, because they want to keep that flexibility, they work even harder to make sure that you don't think I'm slacking on the job because I'm at home. And so we really have to start thinking differently as organizations around where we focus our priority and where we place our trust or distrust of our teams. Thank you.
Yeah. I love that. Yes, I want to say something. As a scientist, we use this thing called the normal bell curve, right? And so it tells you where 70% of the people are at any given time, and on the tails, this is where other people are. At the TurkNet group, what we do is we ask you, and I'm going to ask you to ask your people, okay? Because just because a statistic says X, it doesn't mean that that matters for you. And so sometimes we're basing what we do on what Sally did at her organization, or what Lala did at her organization, or what they did, because everybody's not his, her, or her now. And so we do use averages, but your company might be on the tails. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we have qualitative and quantitative experts that can help you, or you can figure it out. But you can't beat asking what people want. And when you're asking people, make sure that you're not just basing it on what you want, because we already know that the people who make the most goal make the rules. And so the people with,
thank you.
the people in different parts of the organization, they need flexibility. They need other things. So make sure that you are circling and paying attention to what the people in the bottom of the organization need. Because any pyramid, if you look at any pyramid, and I'm not a Delta, so excuse me, this is a pyramid, son. Any pyramid, there are more people at the bottom of the organization than at the top. And so if you're thinking about your engagement surveys and what's really going to work for the people, you got to ask them what matters. And so reboarding is really about, from an equity standpoint, making sure that you're using a head, heart, and hands approach, making sure it's not cookie cutter, making sure that it fits to your people. And that's really, that is really what does matter. And when we're thinking about, what has worked as well, is thinking about programs that have like coaching in them. And so if we had a coach approach to many things, and we have a program at TOG about coaching, and what we have is an idea coaching program where we're bringing any person in any organization who wants to be a coach into this program so they can learn the skills of helping every person be seen, heard, and understood. And then they can start to be true advocates for the organization. And that's what matters.
A true cultural type of change. Yeah. All right, so who has a burning question? So we only have time for a couple, but who really has a question? Can you yell it out? I'll see what I can do to get your voice heard.
You not my name?
You're good. You're good. Thank you.
We have started the DEI at my company. We're doing business sessions. So we had started like attend and 2 might show up. So we finally got people to say, to get engaged, but we found out people won't talk.
Yeah.
How do you get, in a couple of conversations where they was like, we don't think anything is gonna be done, so why participate? So how do you get more people to participate? I know you said trust. Trust is the biggest piece.
Yes.
But how these people will not, and we're trying to get what they need and give them what they want, but they won't participate.
Yeah, that's definitely a cultural thing. And so, I think you want to do a little bit of reverse engineering and start with what would make you feel absolutely safe to talk, and go there first. And once you get that, or what are the reasons why you haven't talked in the past? And so don't blame, we don't want to blame them for not talking, but really start to get those clues, those behaviors that are stopping them. Because many times they don't feel safe. They feel like they're going to be penalized, someone's going to do something. And then once you get that, you remove those barriers, and then you can close that gap.
Any other suggestions?
I certainly agree with Dr. Cherry. I think you have to be very intentional that you provide an environment where it's staff and the facilitator of the group. Leadership should be excluded. If you want to hear from your leaders, put them in a different environment from the frontline staff, because without that, you're not going to have that safety and trust that people need in order to be forthcoming.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'm going to try to be concise and put my thoughts together. But one of the challenges that we face with DEI is that each of the groups, like we talk about groups, but really these are individuals that have individual needs. And so sometimes it requires different approaches to different individuals within the same department, within the same organization. And so how do you deal with this idea of equity, fairness, when you need to provide different things to different people? Even when we talk about flexibility, what that looks like may be very different person A to person B to person C.
I would say the first thing is that you have to realize that inclusion does not mean equality or equal. The three of us sitting here, I think I gave Ann this analogy when we were doing our initial conversation about this panel discussion. I don't know how we got to it, but I talked about equity being different for everyone and inclusion being different for everyone. The equity, if the three of us are standing at a fence to watch a baseball game, and Dr. Cherry is the tallest of the three of us, I'm in the middle, and then Elva is the shortest. So Dr. Cherry doesn't need anything to see over the fence to have a clear line of sight at the game. I, on the other hand, may need a stool to give me the same line of sight that Dr. Cherry has. And then Elva may need
A big ladder.
a ladder. But at the end of the day, we all got something different. Dr. Cherry didn't get anything. I got something, but Elva got the greatest addition or asset that she needed in order for all three of us to have the same line of sight at the game. And so I think what you have to realize is that everyone doesn't need the same thing. What you have to figure out is how do you get everyone to the same point in the organization. And so those resources may look different for different people. And you have to figure out what does the business need, what is your staff's need, and then work from that point to figure out how to address the gaps.
And to be listened to.
Yes,
As
and that's
Dr.
how you
Barnes said.
determine what you need to give them is by listening to them. Because without knowing what we all needed to have the same line of sight at the game, you wouldn't know.
Well, I hate to see this come to an end. This has been absolutely amazing. I don't know about you, I feel a lot richer and in my knowledge and information that I now have that I did not have when I came in. So thank you, ladies, so very much. And thank you, everybody, for coming today. And hopefully you'll have a great rest of the afternoon.